So Windows versus Mac, Command key versus Control key, Finder versus File Explorer, Safari versus Microsoft Edge, window buttons on the top left versus the top right. All of these are part of a bigger debate between Windows and Mac. Even if a Windows laptop was undisputedly better, most Mac users would never switch. And similarly, no matter how good the latest MacBook is, why would I buy it if I'm a Windows user? You see, you can no longer just compare the specs of one laptop versus another. Between a Mac Studio and a Dell desktop, there's so much more to it. These two companies have designed their operating systems to be seamless once you're used to them, and to be very uncomfortable to leave. Think about it. You need to retrain your hands and press Control versus Command. To close a window, you have to go from the top left or the top right. Such subtle things that would really be easy to standardize and make similar, but they're there for a purpose. You see, right now Windows owns 75% of the market share, but that number is slipping as macOS has doubled its market share in just the past decade. So which is actually the better operating system, Windows or Mac? I wanted to dig a little bit deeper. So in this video, I'm breaking this down into 5 main categories. Now, before I get into the UI and the software, let's actually take a step back and start off with just the hardware. Now, I'll show a few laptops in this video, but the two that I plan on using for most of this video are what I think are most representative of Mac versus Windows. So the Mac, of course, is the M1 Max 14-inch MacBook Pro. This has been basically my everyday editing laptop for, well, since it came out. And then for Windows, we have the Lenovo Yoga 9i, which just launched, and let me show you this. This thing folds up and looks like a normal laptop, but when you open it, there are 2 different displays, on the top and on the bottom. Now, you can use this like a normal laptop, and on the bottom, you'll have your keyboard, you'll have a digital trackpad there, or, because typing on a screen is not necessarily enjoyable, there is this little magnetic keyboard that you can snap onto the top, and then you have a digital trackpad on the bottom. You can slide it down and have it on the bottom and have a little display on the top, sort of like the old MacBook Pro Touch Bar, but way bigger and more customizable. Or if you want to use both screens, you can use this little case that comes in the box, and you put your keyboard on the bottom. You can have it either vertical and have 2 upright displays, or put it in book mode. So you can see the options are really endless. Of course, this is touchscreen, obviously, so it comes with a pen, and you can draw on this and sign documents. You can also fold it back into a tablet, and it feels like a genuine tablet. Like, it's pretty thin, and there's no keyboard on the back. So needless to say, it's a very, very versatile device, which is one of the big differences between Mac and Windows. Flexibility is really at the core of Windows. You have so many different laptops with different keyboards. So if you like HP versus Dell, you can choose that. If you like Macs, you're stuck with basically the Apple keyboard on your MacBook. You can also choose your priorities, like the screen quality and refresh rate, or that one laptop that still has like a VGA hookup. And just generally different strengths and weaknesses, different brands to compete on price. So much variety with Windows, which is both a strength and a weakness. And I know this might sound like I'm really fanboying over Windows, but I promise we'll get to the other side in just a minute. Another big benefit with Windows, it's touchscreens. Mac still doesn't support touchscreens, and really the main reason I could determine for that is because they want you to buy an iPad. Now, getting over to what the Mac does really well as far as hardware goes, they're very, very well built. Like, this is a solid laptop. It's all aluminum on the outside, and I know this is going to last for a really long time. I used to use a lot of Windows laptops back in college, and every single one I had, it was an HP Spectre, an HP Envy. The hinge always broke, or at the very least started really getting creaky and weird, whereas Mac, like, again, because they've been making a really similar looking laptop for so long, you can open it with one finger, it's smooth, it feels like a really nice laptop, and I don't have to worry about this laptop taking on any kind of damage. You see, Macs are very vertically integrated. The developer of the software is the same company that makes the hardware, and you can really tell when you're using it. But Mac is generally much, much more expensive. But with that, you're getting a pretty incredible balance of size, battery, and power lately, especially with the M2 and the M1 chips. But that's the gist of the hardware. Flexibility with Windows versus constant, known, well-tested Macs. So now getting into the user experience. Some like to say that one is more intuitive than the other, but I disagree. I've used Windows for most of my life and only switched to Mac about 4 years ago, and now I still use both of them almost every day, and to me, they both seem equally as intuitive. Once you get used to it, like, it just feels natural, and if you've been a Mac user forever and go to Windows, it'll feel unintuitive, and the same can be said the other way around. But Mac generally has a slightly more sleek and minimal design that disappears and allows me to really focus on my work. And with that, Mac actually also has fewer pop-ups and less bloatware in my opinion. So pretty much every Windows laptop or desktop I've ever purchased, when you first start using it, you get these pop-ups all the time about, sign up for this antivirus, sign up for Norton, sign up for this other thing. And it just feels like not my laptop. Like if Windows didn't do that, I think that would be a big win. But one of the benefits of Windows that Mac doesn't do is when you close a window, it actually just closes. Like if I click the X on a Mac, you then need to go and right click and quit the application, or else it's kind of still running, which I always thought was annoying and a little bit weird that they did that. But going back to a benefit for Mac, Mac always allows me to put the taskbar wherever I want. We used to be able to do this with Windows, but with Windows 11 now, you can't. You can only have it on the bottom, and you can choose if it's left or center justified, but you can't put it on the side, which is personally where I would rather have it. And a big win for Windows, of course, is gaming. Now, I'm not a big gamer, but that's absolutely a huge benefit for Windows. Anybody who is a hardcore gamer will almost exclusively use PC, and a lot of that is because you're going to be able to customize the hardware that goes inside of that, whereas with Mac, you really can't customize much of the hardware. Maybe you can add extra RAM on some of the devices. That's really the extent of what you can do. With Mac, however, you can preview audio and video in Finder without opening things, which is super useful. And also when you first get a Mac, you have to change a lot of settings initially just to do what Windows already does with File Explorer. Like for example, show you how much storage you have left on a drive on the bottom in Finder, or show you the file path or different things like that. But Mac, on the other hand, does have a way, way, way better webcam. Now I don't mean on the MacBook in particular, I'm talking about continuity camera. So you can use your iPhone to get by far the best webcam experience I've ever seen. A benefit for Windows, and this is kind of almost ironic, Windows has Face ID and sometimes also fingerprint, but Mac only ever has fingerprint if they even have that. Sometimes you can also sign in with like your Apple Watch when it's nearby or your iPhone, but it just, to me, seems ironic that like with phones, Apple is all in on Face ID and they got rid of Touch ID, and then on their laptops, they're all in on Touch ID and they don't have Face ID. Like it just seems like they have the technology and they have a notch on the MacBook Pro, just add Face ID. That's what Windows has, and it's really a nice experience. Mac can also be a little bit inconsistent with the hotkeys. Sometimes it's Command, sometimes Control, sometimes Option, sometimes Control Option or Command Control. Going back to what I said about snapping windows to the left or the right or the top or whatever, when you're using Mac, at first people kind of complain about that because you have to like really manually adjust all of your windows. But if you download an app called Magnet, it allows you to snap it to the left side, the right side. I think it's like 99 cents. I bought it once and I've been using it for years. And I think it's better than Windows once you have it, but you do have to go out of your way to get it. Whereas Windows allows you to just use hotkeys, snap to the left, right, top corner, whatever. The only thing that I didn't like that Windows does is when I snap something to the right side, it shows a big pop-up and asks me what I want to put on the left side, and I have to click again to not do that. But speaking of magnets, there are some other apps you can get that just work really well on the top menu bar. And of course, you can get all types of different apps up there, like password managers and VPNs and like Adobe things and Magnet, like I said, as well as quick settings like Wi-Fi and Bluetooth settings right up in the top that feel more consistent with what we're seeing on phones. But getting into stability, this might be a hot subject, people might disagree, but Windows, from my experience, seems to run into more issues, and you inevitably find some video deep on YouTube with like 30 views showing you like a 50-step process to go into the registry editor or something like that and change like some little setting just to get your laptop back up and running. But Mac, I have not had to do anything like that ever, and so it feels more stable, which we'll talk about why that might be later on in the video. Personally, I love the gestures on the trackpad on Mac, but Windows do have, like a lot of Windows laptops have similar gestures. Like for example, the Lenovo 9i, for example, has some really cool gestures, not just with the trackpad, but also on the screen. So if I tap with 8 fingers on the bottom, it'll open up a keyboard and a trackpad so I can just type normally. I could also tap with 3 fingers just to get a virtual trackpad on there, or I can like tap and hold a window and then flick it down and it'll go to the other display. So everyone has their own little unique things, but that kind of just represents how Windows works really well as both a tablet and a laptop. Moving on to the next category of software and app availability. Like I said before, Mac seems to be a little bit more stable with certain apps, which is why I originally, a little bit of a story time here, why I started using a Mac at all 4 years ago was because I had a Windows laptop. I had that HP Spectre and I was editing videos on there, and like Adobe just wouldn't work with that. Even though the laptop was only about a year old, the the graphics card in there was no longer compatible with Adobe Premiere Pro, and so the laptop was completely useless to me, and that's part of Windows. It's really hard for developers to make software that works on thousands of different devices that all have, different components on the inside, whereas if you're developing for Mac, there's only maybe like a dozen or 24 at the most different configurations that you need to worry about. So it's easier to make apps stable on a Mac. Now, that's not to say it's always better, because there are a lot of apps out there that are only available on Windows, a lot of games and things like that. Like Windows owning 75% of the market share means that more developers are more likely to make more money with Windows. But getting into the next category, probably one of the most important ones, is the ecosystem. And this has a lot of different things, not just phones and AirDrop, but also other devices you connect, how you find devices, your whole network that's attached to this. Starting off, the first thing being Bluetooth devices. This one, neither one does an especially great job at. Like, Bluetooth settings feel like they're deeper in your laptop. Despite most people using Bluetooth earbuds when they work, this Lenovo right here, like the keyboard, the mouse, everything is Bluetooth, and it kind of connects very easily, as well as many other earbuds using Microsoft Swift Pair. Now on Mac, this doesn't happen unless it is an Apple device, in which case it's even more seamless. Like, it just pops up and you just click connect, and like it'll switch seamlessly between all Apple devices. But speaking of other Apple devices, Apple does have AirDrop, while Windows has Nearby Share. Nearby Share, in my opinion, is not as good as AirDrop. AirDrop's just easier to access, more seamless, and works better in my opinion. Of course, you do have Find My on Apple, which can help you find not just your devices, but also your friends and other, like your keychain, things like that. You can also unlock with your Apple Watch. And as I mentioned before, you do have continuity camera, which is a huge win. Something interesting is the screen extension. So if you have two Windows laptops, and I don't mean like two screens on one laptop, I mean like a second Windows laptop, you can actually extend your screen onto the other laptop wirelessly. On Mac, you can't do that, but you can do some similar things using an iPad, but many Windows laptops are starting to do this as well. For example, Samsung laptops work really well with Samsung tablets and do the exact same thing. So as far as connecting to your phone, Windows came a really long way with the Phone Link app. I think it was previously called Your Phone. And this now does so much more than it used to. We can see your photos on here, you can do messages, you can take phone calls on here, and this works with Android phones really well. Whereas on Mac, it's connected a little bit differently. Like, you have iMessage on your MacBook, you have FaceTime on your MacBook, and you have AirDrop as well as like iCloud. But it feels more like everything's just background connected, versus this is able to access your phone directly. Moving into the final category here, longevity and security. This is an important one. If you're spending money on a laptop or a desktop, you want to make sure it's lasting a long time. But before we get into longevity, let's start off with security. I think there's kind of a false notion that Macs are inherently way safer and you can't get a virus on a Mac and you don't have to worry about anything. Now, maybe a long time ago that was the case because it was such a small market share that most hackers focused on Windows, but it's absolutely not true now. Like, you can get yourself some malware no matter what device you're using if you're going to the wrong places. So I won't pretend to be an expert on cybersecurity. I just want to point out that, like, the idea that Macs are inherently like super safe and Windows is not is probably false. Now, as far as longevity goes, this one is interesting. If you have a stock Mac, like a MacBook, versus a stock Windows laptop, I think that Mac is generally the clear winner, and rightfully so. It's a really expensive device, but the hardware, the software, it all seems to work well for a long period of time. But, this is a really big but here, Windows has the advantage of interchangeable parts. So if you look at a desktop, for example, there are people that are running a Windows desktop, and you can leave a comment below, that have had it for like over a decade and it's still running really, really well because they can just swap out the RAM with something newer. They can swap out like a lot of different things are easy to swap out with newer parts. So Windows versus Mac. Leave a comment and let me know which one you think is better and why. But I would summarize it like this. If you want customization, Windows is the clear choice, not just with hardware, but also with software. You just have a lot of options. So like this Windows laptop is cool and it works well, but it's more or less, to me, like an exciting thing to have. Whereas a MacBook is boring, and that's kind of the point. Like, this to me is just a tool. I don't really care about what it looks like. I care that it disappears and lets me focus on my work, and it does that reliably and consistently over a long time. So for me personally, when I'm editing videos, using a Mac is my go-to. There's less updates, less pop-ups, easier app compatibility, so like Adobe, remember that story I told you before, and a durable build. When I'm not editing videos, if I was just working personally on like a 3D printer or something like that, like Windows is probably a good option there. No. So that's my take on both of them. There's really no right answer for everybody. It depends on what you're looking for and why you're using a laptop. But like I said, leave a comment and let me know which one you like better. Since you enjoyed this video, consider checking this one out next, where I compare Apple's ecosystem to Samsung's ecosystem. Like a pretty similar video. I think you're gonna like it. If you haven't already, consider subscribing as well. I'm Mike O'Brien, and I'll see you over there.